October 20th, 1983. This is Joe Todd, an interview with Mr. Paul Haggard. Mr. Haggard, where were you born?
Tulsa, Oklahoma.
And when's your birthday?
November the 15th, and I was born 1909.
1909. Who was your father?
William Ellis Haggard.
Where was he from?
He was born in Tennessee.
And who was your mother?
Lorraine Bond Haggard. She was born in Kentucky.
Kentucky. What kind of work did your father do?
He was an electrician and specialized in designing light fixtures. And he had the distinction of wiring the building 3 or 4 times. It is now Boston Avenue, and he also did the Boston Avenue fixtures. And he specialized in building lamps.
That Boston Avenue
Methodist Church.
Yeah. Did he design the lamps for that church?
Yeah, all those things. Everything, if you'll notice, all those things point like that, and that's the hands, supposed to be a modern version of the hands pointing to heaven.
So did he
in
work
prayer.
Did he work with Bruce Goff on that?
I presume so, somewhere in the deal. Of course, Ada Robinson, was supposed to have done that. There's always a bone of contention in that.
Oh, yeah. When did your father come to Oklahoma?
It must have been about 1905 or 4, along in there, because I was born in 1909.
How come he came here?
I don't know. Oh, he came to San Antonio from Tennessee, and he had a sister there, and her husband owned the electric power company. And then he migrated to Tulsa after he learned that. And I guess through friends that were in the electric business there. That's about what I know about that.
Yeah.
And then of course, he stayed in the electric business all his life. Mother's still there. She's still alive in Tulsa.
She is.
She's 93.
Where she live?
In Tulsa.
I mean, what?
Oh, with my sister on North to East 25th. Dude, 22 East 25th in Tulsa.
4222. Northeast 25th.
Or it's east. There is no northeast.
Yeah, okay. What's your first memory of Tulsa?
Well, I had a sister 2 and I was 4. And my first recollection was playing in this, we had a acreage truck farm. Raised chickens and peaches and things like that. And I remember playing out in this field between that and the street down at a block away, and my recollection was the streetcars that went up and down, which ended up at the edge of what was Kendall College, now the University of Tulsa. And I remember I was fascinated with those streetcars, and I never lost that fascination throughout my life. Then I remember she died with whooping cough and pneumonia, and I remember her death and the funeral. And
what year was that?
let's see, I was 1904 and about 1913, I guess. And then I remember we moved up to a larger home right at the end of the streetcar company line. And I got more fascinated by turning the trolleys. And
What was the name of the streetcar company?
Tulsa Street Railway. It was owned by a man named Boswell.
Boswell.
He lived in Detroit or somewhere up in there. And he that was his interest, was in starting streetcar companies over the country.
How much did it cost to ride the streetcar?
At 5 cents.
How far would that go? How far would they run?
That would run, well, that line went downtown, and they had 3 lines, North and South Main. They had Kendall and West 5th, which went by the streetcar line. Then they had a Frisco, and I forget the other end of it. Those were the 3 lines. And it cost 5 cents to go to town, or you could stay on the car and go clear to the end of the line. If you got off and transferred, say, to the North or South Main, I actually don't think it cost you anything. You had to have a transfer. Then, of course, later the fare went up to 7, and then it finally got to the point to where jitneys, they were usually Studebakers, seemed to be the best suited. They had running boards on them. You rode inside for a nickel and or 7 cents. And you could ride on the running board and hold on to the top outside for a nickel. And then a more inventive driver bought a bus, bought a brand new Mack bus. And he put that on, and he started doing pretty good, so then several other fellas bought. Then there was a barber that had 2 or 3 barber shops in Tulsa, and he was quite innovative. And he bought all these drivers out and formed a bus company. And he was doing all right. He bought some more buses. Then a man by the name of G.A. Chandler, and also J.A. Freighties, who is right now, his son is involved in buying a Kaiser aluminum company. They went together and formed the Oklahoma Union Railway, which was another streetcar and an interurban line. And they eventually bought this barber out and bought more buses and formed what was the Union Transportation, which later was the main and only transportation system in Tulsa. And they ran the interurban line down through Sepulveda on to 3 or 4 towns. Originally it was supposed to go on to Okmulgee and even more, but it never got any further than a little town on the other side of Tulsa. That ran also a freight line they had from the glass company over there. That finally...
Frankoma?
Well, they served that, yes. This was Liberty Glass.
Liberty Glass.
And that, over the years, that finally gave out. But the Liberty Glass bought it, and they retained that freight line for quite a few years because they were doing all their switching out of the Liberty Glass, among others. Then it finally gave away here 2 or 3 years ago.
Now, Liberty Glass is still there, isn't it?
Uh-huh. Well, didn't they have a Frank Homerberg?
Yeah.
Didn't Liberty Glass, something happened there last year or
They
something?
had a strike, didn't they?
I guess maybe that's what it was. And, I don't know how they ship their product out now because the line is out of business.
What did they make mainly, Liberty Glass?
They had you remember the 7-Up bottles with that decoration on the bottle? That was quite a secret with them, and there's a story that was told to me that no one person knew the complete process there. It took 3 people, and it was quite a process. And they made all those 7-Up bottles, among other things. Of course, they made milk bottles. And, I don't know, but it was quite a successful operation. That and the Frank Homer, I guess, were probably 2 of the oldest industries in Sapulpa.
Was at this time when you were a child, was the railroad still centered in Sapulpa?
Uh-huh.
How did Tulsa get the railroad from Sapulpa?
The Frisco, that was their main roundhouse, and all the Frisco men lived there. And that's where everything originated, their yards and all that. I suppose through the Chamber of Commerce, they got the Frisco to move to West Tulsa. Now, some of those Frisco men were like city councilmen and might even be mayor, or, were involved in civic work, and they didn't want to move, so they made a deal with Frisco that Frisco would furnish the transportation from Sapulpa to the yards in West Tulsa. And they'd maintain their homes in Sapulpa, which wasn't so bad. It's only, 10 to 15 miles only. So that rule held. I guess it holds fast today. I'm sure many of them still live there. And that's how they finally agreed that Frisco would furnish. And they made a contract with this Union Transportation Company, which was the last company, to furnish the bus transportation. It ran all night long. And primarily to transport the engineers and all the crew over.
Mm-hmm. Is that the main reason that Tulsa more or less overtook Sapulpa?
Yes, I can remember my mother and dad and uncles. Our big thing on Sunday was to get in one of the uncles' cars and drive to Sapulpa for hamburgers and pop or whatever. And that was the place to go. But, of course, Tulsa had some pretty hot fellows over there, get up and go. The Skellys and Sinclair and all of those people, Cosden, Josh Cosden, who started that big refinery, the world's largest independent refinery. And those fellas were on the go and were making money, and they just built Tulsa up until it just was a natural thing that it surpassed Sapulpa and anything else. Red Fork could have been, but it just happened to be that the right people were in the right place, and it came about.
Where is Red Fork?
It's across the river. It's beyond West Tulsa. It's the last, I'd say, center of activity between there and Sapulpa. There was Red Fork, West Tulsa, and then of course Tulsa. But somewhere in the deal, there weren't the right people in the right place to promote the others, because they were older, actually, than Tulsa was.
Mm-hmm.
But it just work out that way.
Who founded Tulsa?
Hmm?
Who founded Tulsa?
Well, it was originally Tulsa Town, Tulsey. And it was founded, I guess, during the run. I presume that's where it got its title, Tulsa Town, and of course was Indian Territory. And I guess that's the way it was.
What year was it founded?
Gosh, I don't know. All I know is the state is 3 days and 1 year older than I am. Now, when it comes to Tulsa, I don't know. I really know more about Oklahoma City's history than I do Tulsa.
Mm-hmm. Where'd you start school?
At Kendall, and there was no kindergarten. I was the first grade.
What year?
Let's see, I was 6. It would be 1915, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I know I fell down in a mud puddle, and my mother had to come get me and change clothes.
Do you remember any organized efforts in your school for World War I, 1917, 1918?
I remember the war. Yeah. What do you mean?
I mean, would they have bond drives or the stamp that you bought?
Oh, I was conscious of those things going on. I was more conscious of the fact that all of my uncles went, and also I was very conscious of this big influenza thing, because I had a tendency, on account of these streetcars, to get on these streetcars and the motorman knew me, and I'd ride with them. So I was a kind of a roamer. And if my mother wanted me, well, she'd ask one of the motormen and they'd know where I was. Well, Mother and Dad and my brothers and sisters all went down with the flu. My grandmother came out to take care of them. And I took off on one of these streetcars, and when I came back, we had a big sign on the front of the house, quarantine. And they did that in those days if you had a communicable disease. And she was kidding, but she told me I couldn't come in because they had a sign there. Well, I got scared and took off, and then they realized what had happened, and they started to search for me, and it was 2 hours before they found me. That's one thing I remember.
Where'd you go? Where'd you go?
I just wandered around the neighborhood. And then I remember all the uncles going, friends, and of course things were hard to get. You know, sugar, like everything, sugar. And of course I know during the war I fell between 2 railroad tracks on a piece of glass, and I still have the scar. See that?
Yeah.
Ripped that open, and a lady crossed the tracks. I was with some friends. They took me over there, and she filled that full of sugar to stop the bleeding, and then wrapped a towel around it, and the boys got me home. And I know Dad and a friend were sitting there, and they kind of joked about the sugar. For heaven's sakes, you know, sugar you can hardly get. What a waste.
Remember Armistice Day?
Oh, yes.
What was that day like in Tulsa?
Oh, everybody just went wild. Horns flew and whatever you could make a noise with, you know, sirens. People run out in the front yards, and well, just everybody just went frantic. Because I guess between the Civil War and that was the biggest, you know, catastrophe that the population had known. And Boy, they let loose. It was something.
What about the race riot, 1921?
I actually went through that. I was trying to think the other day when they showed that on the air what age I was. It so happened I lived across the street from, at that time, my buddy, schoolmate, and then the boy I ran around with. There were a couple more. His dad was police commissioner at that time, J.D. Atkinson. Well, I knew that something was going on because Dad and friends and other people left that night. And I knew something was going on, but Don called me the next morning early and said his dad was going to make a tour, inspection, and that we could go with him. So we did, and oh boy, what I saw, this happened. There was a store with the front knocked out, burned out. Don and I found 2 boxes of Cracker Jacks. And we were eating those, and then we came across those poor colored boys that were down there on the tracks that had been shot, and the sun was on them and all that stuff, you know. Well, that's where we threw the Cracker Jacks away. And Don's dad made this inspection tour and the whole thing. We went with him, and we saw several things like that. And of course, churches burned, homes burned. I had an uncle who had somewhere around 15, 20, or 25 new homes over there he had built for rental. And he lost all of them. And it wasn't just the colored people that lost, it was white people in there.
What started that?
Oh, supposedly this elevator operator who was colored and the Mayo building, or one of their buildings, they owned 3 of them, made this pass to this white girl. That is what supposedly started him. And they jailed him. And that night, loads of colored people came over to free him. And we learned later that they were after Mr. Atkinson, who was police commissioner, and the chief of police or anybody. But it's been refuted and argued and everything that it didn't happen that way and did happen. At that time, that was a story, that they had arrested this colored elevator operator for making the pass to the girl, and that they were coming over to get him out. And the thing went from there. Everybody, the white men or people were notified, and they all took off for town. And you could bet that most of them were armed. Dad was. And from there on, it exploded, and I guess they drove them back, and then they started setting fire to everything. And those churches blew up. Those churches were loaded with ammunition. I actually saw the results of that. And they didn't blow up from being set on fire. They were loaded with ammunition. Attics, basements, and for some reason.
Okay. The race riot.
Of course, a lot of things have been argued and so forth about that. But that was the original thing, and the thing that set it off. And of course, you know, the feeling of integration. I can remember very well how embarrassed I was on a streetcar when my mother would go up and have the motorman stop the streetcar because there was a colored man sitting in the front, and there was a Jim Crow sign back here that she sat back behind that. And today, she doesn't feel that way at all. Things have changed, and in fact, she had colored maids who were great friends of hers. But that was the feeling in those days, and
How many were killed in that race riot?
I don't know. I know I saw 3. I don't know, you'd have to go back into the files. They told on a TV film the other day, which was repeated. I think it was always said more than actually happened. The pitiful thing about that was they took them to McNulty Park, the baseball park, and Convention Hall, which is now the old lady on Brady, you know, and herded them in that with no facilities for anything. And you know, it was in the summertime, hot. And that was a mess. The only way you could get out would be for, in those days, people like Skelly and all those people in the South that had those beautiful homes, all had 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, name it, servants, chauffeurs, everything. All right, they could go up and get theirs out and take them home. They couldn't leave the house. They had to keep them in the home and get them out of there. But, oh, it was a pitiful thing. Ew, awful. It's a thing I presume Tulsa would like to live down. I had a funny thing, you know, I traveled around in the organ business, and I used to go to Fort Worth. And I went into church, and of course they had the colored maid, and they found out in Tulsa. And they asked me if I was there for the race ride, and I said, oh yes. Well, they had taken off down the tracks and stayed in Fort Worth, and they never went back. There were a lot of those people went down to Muskogee, Fort Worth, Dallas, any direction. And I ran into quite a few of them later at different places, and they said they had never returned. Took off in the middle of the night, and that was it.
How big of an area was burned in Tulsa, destroyed?
Oh, it covered from Archer, and that's where the railroad tracks were. And it covered from Archer out 10, 12, 14 blocks, and almost that much of a square area.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a block or two. And the entire Greenwood, which was their main street, and still famous today, it was absolutely devastating, the business section.
Did you see the National Guard come in?
No, I presume they did, because that's the first thing you called in those days.
Yeah, the governor called out the Guard.
Yeah, there wasn't any highway patrol or anything. The militia.
Mm-hmm.
We call it the militia.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, didn't the governor, he declared martial law and put the city under martial law. So you know the militia was there.
Mm-hmm. When did you first get interested in organ work?
Not necessarily the work, but I used to go to, my mother and grandmother were great movie fans. And my grandmother lived downtown, which is now the First Baptist Church in Tulsa. And mother would take me, we'd get on the streetcar and go down, and we'd go to the movies. That was a big thing in those days. Well, they went to one day, and it didn't have a pipe organ in it. And I didn't like it. So I refused to go to that theater anymore. But I was always fascinated with the sound of the organ in the theaters and everything. And I always thought I'd like to be an organist, either church or theater, one. But my high school, I was on the Statecraft Club. And 2 men walked in one day and said they needed somebody as a helper. I asked them what they were doing, and they said they're getting ready to put this pipe organ, which was a big one, in the high school. And I said, well, you just hired him.
What high school was this?
Central High in Tulsa.
Central, yeah.
And it was a big 4-manual organ, and well, I was in school and on the stagecraft club, and I guess I didn't give it too much thought, but I just skipped school and went to work for him. But I was working at a school, and it took about 2 weeks for the school people to catch me, and we had a wonderful principal. He called me in. He asked me, he said, "Are you interested in golf organ?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "Well, why don't we rearrange your schedule and you work for him in the afternoon, go to school in the morning?" And I said, "Fine." So I did.
What was his name, the principal?
Merle V. Pruddy, one of the finest educators you'll ever see. He later ended up as superintendent of schools, and then later was vice president of Columbia University Stevens College in Columbia,
Yeah.
Missouri. He was a wonderful educator. He was a man who, could, instead of spanking the devil out of me or giving me detention, he sat down and worked the problem out. And if he hadn't, I'd probably be doing something else today. I don't know. I've often thought about that. Well, we put that organ in, and
What kind of organ was it?
Kilgan, George Kilgan, same as Civic Center. So I ended up 25 years with them, and was general manager of service, installation, and sales for the Midwest.
What was the name of the company?
George Kilgan and Son,
George Kilpin.
Incorporated.
Where were they headquartered?
St. Louis. It was a 300-year firm, handed down from father to son, and originated in Germany, then moved to New York, then moved to St. Louis. And unfortunately, some squabbles between the 4 brothers ended up in court, and the court liquidated. They couldn't settle it. So I made a contract with the court trustees to finish the work we had going on here. Then I fell out of all that business. And then later, I formed my own company, but then I went with Ale and Skinner out of Boston to make the Mormon Tabernacle, and all those famous organs. Stayed with them for 20 years. And through wars and depressions and everything else. I had a friend here, Robert Johnson, and he was trustee of the Oklahoma Union, the streetcar system in Inner Urban. I had met him through a church connection that bought an organ. He was on the board or something. So they told us to cut out the organ business and get into defense. Well, that was defense, so I went up to see him, and he said yes, he had a good job. Well, you see, streetcars were a hobby too. I never thought about making a living in the streetcar business, but transportation, but it was a hobby with me as much as pipe organ. So I went down to see him, he said yes, he took me to dinner, and I thought, oh boy, I'm going to get a job at a big desk with 2 secretaries helping direct the transportation system. We ended up on the streetcar bar, and he said, "Bring him in." Well, they took me and broke me in on streetcars. Well, that was fun. It got into hard work when you stopped on the street and pick up 50 people at every corner.
What'd you do with?
Drove Inner Urbans and streetcars.
Oh, you were a driver then?
And I ended up with a run on Belle Isle, and then the Inner Urbans and all that.
That's here in Oklahoma City?
It's in Oklahoma City.
Oh, no, when did you move to Oklahoma City?
1942, when World War II broke out. The reason that we moved down here, I had the WWII contract, and 2 or 3 big churches. And I thought, well, we're getting some kind of defense work, and I can always keep the WKY organ on the air. And 2 or 3 others, a weekend or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it did work out that way. And it was quite a help because things got pretty high, you know. Then, well, I used to grab another motorman or somebody and keep the tools in the car, and we'd run out and run up WKY and tune in, or run out to church. And you see, you'd go to work at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and maybe you'd get off at 1 or 2, or you'd go to work at 3 in the afternoon, work at midnight or something like that. So we had plenty of time to do both.
Mm-hmm. Was Belle Isle still a big amusement park at that time?
It was waning. I know I took, before that, I had taken, my family, we didn't live too far from there. We'd go down there on Sundays. But it was beginning to end. I think they had some trouble down there or something, and the OG&E kind of closed it up. And it, during the war, it was absolutely nothing so far as entertainment or recreation was concerned. But the Belle Isle made that little loop down there to turn around and go back, the streetcar. And about all you could say was people would go down there and fish. That was it.
Are they going to fill that lake in?
Hmm?
Are they going to fill that lake in, Belle Isle Lake?
There was a piece in the paper, picture, just a couple of days ago. They're draining it and supposed to build this big hotel complex, and I don't know what all in there. It's been in the plans for several years, but there's a picture where they're draining it. I could have wished it had been left. It was pretty, and then the powerhouse, I think, has been made a historical building. And it should be, because it's beautiful architecture, and it has a lot to do with the history. It furnished power for all the streetcars, and I don't know what else.
When was that built, that Belle Isle power plant?
Oh, way back there, I guess when the streetcar system first started.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought it had to do with power for residential use and things, but I think it was mainly for the streetcar system because they used a lot of electricity. I know when the other end of the Belle Isle streetcar line was the Capitol, and on the Belle Isle line, boy, that streetcar would run 90 miles an hour like a jackrabbit. When you get out to the Capitol, it'll hardly make it because the power had, you know, the further it goes, the weaker it gets. They really needed a substation out there, but they never did.
So you moved here in 1942.
April 15th.
And after World War II, you went back into organ work.
Oh, yes. It wasn't too long until they gave us, I think they were called C rations, and some gas, and you could get your tires recapped. And so that gave us and most of the organ companies, some of them built gliders, some of them airplane wings. They were well adopted to that kind of fine woodwork, you know, and things like that. Kimball built coffins, laboratory equipment, and they never did go back in the organ business. There was more money then, and all different ones did different things.
Mm-hmm.
But after a while, it was still tough. Materials were hard to get. I know the telephone company was a wonderful asset to us after the war. They had plenty of stock, and I can't remember how many different jobs where they would furnish us the cable, which was telephone cable for the organ, and various things like that, you know. They were wonderful. And we gradually got back into it. It was a battle to get certain materials. For some reason, the pipe organ uses the most strategic materials when it comes to wartime. So that's the reason they cut them out. And
what do you mean by strategic materials?
Well, what's necessary, in other words, copper, or cables, metals nearly of all kinds, which are used in war, would be the metals that we use in pipe organs, see, and wood too. But you take your electric cables, like the telephone company uses, oh man, you know, that would be the first thing, first priority in war. And of course all your metals. Virgin tin, which is not to be confused with a tin pan, it comes from South America.
Now, do you build organs from the ground up?
So we're equipped here to, in fact, we have a prospect, and we will. Now, no pipe organ company ever built the entire instrument from one end to the other. They'll order pipes. Now, especially in Europe, is this true? There'll be little places all over the country that make pipes. Want to make a certain type of pipe. We have that here. Regardless, the Alien Skinner used to order pipes from Europe, from here, from this place, that place. You'll find one that does unusually good work in that place, and so on. Now, a company will order its magnets from a supply house, or maybe they make their own, or another company will order this or that, and all companies order blowers from various places. Now, the difference is when you get these pipes is the voicing, not only in the voicing room in the factory, but also the final voicing in the church.
What do you mean by voicing?
Getting different sounds, make this pipe sound this way, that way, or
is it like
more
tuning?
stringy,
Okay.
Tuning has a lot to do with it. And you do that to the atmosphere of the acoustics of that building. If it's more dead, then you have to brighten it. If it's good resonance, then you do something else. So the end result is actually the voicing of the pipes. So as long as somebody makes pipes that are well made, you know, that part doesn't enter into it, doesn't make a difference. And most companies, they'll build their own consoles and things like that, but they buy component parts to go in that. It would be pretty hard for one company to build every part, because the cost of building this particular part and the number of parts he uses, it wouldn't come out right.
Yeah. Who makes the best pipes?
Oh, that's hard to say. We get ours from A.R. Shop and Sons, whose father started it. In Alliance, you can get wonderful pipes from Germany. It depends on whether you want strings, diapasons, or reeds. There's some companies that specialize in reeds. You kind of have to figure out what you want and where you want it, and tell them what specifications you want.
I noticed some pipes are metal, some pipes are wood.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's the difference?
Well, you're here, let's put it this way. You have a lot of different kinds of metal pipes. You have your diapasons of principal, you have strings, you have dulcianas. Now, the thinner the tone is, the thinner the wall is in the pipe.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what that pipe is made of, it may be lead, it may be zinc, it may be an alloy. Now, have you ever noticed those pipes with spots all over them?
Mm-hmm.
That's spotted tin. That's the tin, the little spot. And they make that with lead and different alloys and mix it. The thickness of the pipe has to do with the tone. And then, of course, the nicking, and that gets down into some very detailed physics.
What's nicking?
That's the little nick in a pipe that in the mouth of it. Some have none. others have a certain amount, and deeper and all that. That goes into the voicing of what the pipe actually comes out with, how it sounds. It may sound like a violin, it may sound like a big-bodied principal, and all of that. It gets highly entailed in physics. Has a lot to do with physics of sound.
What is the largest organ you've worked on?
It would have to be between St. Luke's and an organ I put in Abilene, Texas, in McMurray College. The president went up and bought the organ. We call it the pickle organ because it belonged to H.J. Heinz, and you know, to make tomato ketchup and all that. Now, they built that organ in a big auditorium that they built for their employees, and it was a big thing. Well, the employees formed a union and belonged to the union, and it made H.J. Heinz mad, so they just did away with the auditorium. Said you can't have it anymore. And they sold the organ. Well, this president of this university went up and bought it. He didn't know a thing about it. And one morning he got me out of bed at 7 o'clock and said, I want you to come down and install this organ. Well, I was still asleep. I said, where is it? What is it? I said, well, I'll have to come down and check it over. Well, I spent 2 weeks checking it over. So they furnished a nice guest room and a new dormitory. Set up the factory, gave me a pickup, a purchase agent, and 17 students. And I spent 2 years down there installing that.
How large was the organ? How many ranks?
I've got a picture of it. It was so big we had to build a big got an automobile lift, like the grease car on there.
Yeah.
Built the shaft and built a platform, and then General Electric came out and built all the electrical components. There's the stage level.
Yeah.
And there it is up, and it was so big that when it was down and regular, it still blocked off the stage, so we built a big thing for it to go down.
Is this, well, that's not the organ there, is it?
That came out of the Criterion here. I bought it, and that's my studio I put it in. It was down on West Main.
So you have the organ out of the Criterion Theater.
There's a funny story attached to that.
Now this one that you put in Abilene, how many ranks is it?
Gosh, I don't know, and I don't have my files. It was 70 or 80 ranks.
Now how many pipes in a rank?
61 or 73.
What's the
average?
Oh,
You see, a great organ doesn't need a coupler. Now this gets into a little technical thing which confuses people. I would say the average would be 73.
in one rank.
See, that includes the entire keyboard, which is 61. And also, when you put a coupler on, it'll take care of another octave that you're going to have to play.
Okay.
So usually the average is 73.
Okay. What's you consider the finest instrument you've worked on?
That still goes back to Cassidy Chapel that McCoy wrote about.
The Cassidy School?
And that's entirely on account of acoustics. Now, you can take the finest pipe organ built by the finest builder and installed by the finest installer in the world, and if it's in a bad acoustical room, it's not going to be worth a continental.
How does St. Luke's measure up towards that?
Well, I've always hesitated to say anything about it because it's embarrassing. It's poor, very poor acoustic. they've spent money with echo systems and everything. Now, First Christian is just as bad, if not worse. And you can go back and pick out 10 others in town that are very bad. Your Gothic building, as a rule, will turn out to be the best. That would be First Presbyterian, but they have troubles. The Cassidy Chapel is just a little gem that's perfect within its own right. You didn't have to do anything to it, it just came out that way.
What kind of organ is in Cassidy Chapel?
They're Aeolian Skinner, St. Luke's and Aeolian Skinner, and St. Paul's and Aeolian Skinner. And I either sold or installed all three of them, but the largest happens to be the poorest, but that's acoustics. I'm not talking about the organ. St. Paul's is next. It's just medium. It's not bad, and it isn't perfect. But the Cassidy job is the smallest of the three, and it's by far the best sounding. Well, your piano has its own sounding board. Your violin, that's the reason you have that little body. That's all the work of the great violin players, Mighty and
Stern. Isaac Stern.
Yeah. The perfection in that violin is that little body, the acoustical background.
Now you mean players or makers?
No, I'm talking about the instrument itself.
Oh, you mean Stradivarius?
Stradivarius.
Yeah.
Your piano, the difference between a Steinway and a cheap piano is that sounding board. The voice is created in here, and that's kind of a little sound box. Of course, a voice has to kind of, like a pipe organ, has to have a good atmosphere in which to sing. Well, you can take all your instruments. They have their own soundboard, but a pipe organ has to depend entirely on the auditorium. And that's why organ builders are so concerned about the acoustic of the place. Now, we were more so than ever at the Aeolian Skinner, but we turned down jobs that were bad. And we didn't know St. Luke's was going to be that way. We thought it was going to be a different building until after the organ was built.
Well, let me... So how long have you been in the organ business?
Let's see. (1928), and this is '83.
Now, is that in high school in 28?
When I started in high school was 28, and this is '83. It's been 75 years. Oh, wait a minute, it couldn't be 75. I'm not 75. 28. 5. Oh.
About 45.
2, yeah. 55. 55.
You've been in the organ business 55 years.
Mm-hmm. I was with Aeolian Skinner 20 and Kilgan 25, and there was 3 or 4 years in between there that I was in business for myself and didn't represent anybody. So, 8, 13 is 5, and 2 from 7 is 5, 55.
So when did, now are you in partnership with Mr. Cotner now, or?
Uh-huh.
Now when did you all join up?
Well, sir, I guess it was last December. We both went to a dinner. It was a music business dinner. And I had heard of Tom as an organist, and he said he'd heard of me as a builder. But that's all we knew about each other. And we got to talking. He said something about he lived in Oklahoma. And that he'd like to move back and go in the organ business. And I said, well, I said something. And he said, well, he had been with Alien Skinner. I said, well, you where? He told me, and I told him, and we got to talking, and the more we talked and learned about each other, the more we would tell each other about our backgrounds, you know. And by gosh, I said, well, I'm kind of semi-retired. I said, I kind of came out of retirement to do Civic Center and St. Joseph's Old Cathedral. And I said, but I haven't pushed it because it takes two to do this business. And by gosh, the more we talked, we decided to form a partnership. And in 2 weeks we had. And I already had offices and shops merely for the Civic Center organ up at the Civic Center. But we couldn't do outside business there. We could always work on the organ and use it anyway without any rent, but the minute we started doing outside business we had to pay rent, so we rented. And we operated out of there. Then he had little shops in Bartha. Well, we started sending out form letters, and with return cards, and we thought it'd take about 3 years to build it up to where we could, you know, depend on it for a living and all that. And my gosh, we started getting these cards back, and the first thing you know, we were signing up these contracts, and it kept us busy just running back and forth to check the organs and write the contract. And we had no idea that it would do what it did, but right now we're booked up solid for 1984. Absolute solid with the contracts in, the down payments made.
How many organs do you have in contract now that you keep up?
Oh.
Was that a fair question?
No. I mean, it's I'm in the process now of making a file, but I haven't in the file. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. We've got 6 big contracts. That is practically building a new organ, rebuilding all the way through, which will take us 3 to 4. Then we've got these are service contracts that we take care of the organ regularly under contract. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 20 service contracts.
20.
That's organs if we make 2 trips or more a year, you know, to keep tune. And we automatically go to those places. Then we have more coming in, which each one of these rebuild jobs will be a service contract. You know, like Philbrook and all that.
How many times a year do you have to tune an organ?
No, it should be a minimum of 2. You tune it for air conditioning and you tune it for heat, because there's a definite change in the actually in the humidity of the air and all that. The maximum number of trips I ever made on a contract would be WWII, which was every Saturday. Tuned that organ every week, 52 weeks a year. That's the way WWII wanted it. And then it was a feed for a lot of solo programs on NBC Network and, you know, things like that. And it was an important thing to them to, and it never was in the 14 years we had a service contract. It never was off the air for any reason of that kind.
Now, when you tune an organ, you have to tune each pipe individually?
Mm-hmm.
What if a good-sized organ, that could be a...
It takes a lot of time, yeah. You can go pretty fast. Now, once in a while, you run across a pipe, a reed especially, that's dirty. You've got to take a dollar bill or $5 bill or something and clean it, or tighten it, or something like that. But the ordinary pipe that isn't a reed, you can go pretty fast.
I mean, how do you tune it? How do you tune the...
There's a band, a little band around the pipe.
Around the pipe, okay.
Now, a wooden pipe's got a stopper in the top of it. You make that stopper go up or down.
Mm-hmm.
And a reed, you have to go down on a wire, which shortens the vibration of that reed inside. It's like a rubber band. You stretch it and it'll make a higher sound than if you let loose it.
Now, the one has a band around it. What do you do for the band?
You slide that up and down. It's a slide tuner.
Okay, I see.
And you have a little extra length on your pipe, you know, over...
So that would take two people then?
Oh yeah, there's got to be one at the keyboard and one up in the femur.
At the pipe.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like business is doing pretty good then.
It is. We couldn't believe it. We thought it'd take a long time, you know, to let people know and all that stuff.
So you've been in partnership
Since the first of the year, January.
Huh. How many organ companies like you are around this part of the country?
There's another fellow here. Let's say 1.5. There are 2 of them. And most of these jobs we've been getting are just one of these fellows has been messing up, not the other one. The other one's a good organ builder. But let's say, 2. And that's all. Now, if there's one in Tulsa, there may be. But outside of Tom and I, and D.L. McCrary, and another fella, that's the only organ builders I know of, unless they come from out of state.
Yeah.
Now we have 1 or 2 that come from out of state, tune an organ or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well, what is the largest organ in the state? Where is it located?
I would suspect First Presbyterian in Tulsa. Now, Kosovo out of Canada is putting an organ in Holy Family Cathedral, the big Catholic cathedral in Tulsa. Now that is a tremendous organ. I don't know whether it's going to be larger than the First Presbyterian or not in Tulsa. Now St. Luke's was, but it's 98 ranks. These organs are going above 100. And now which of the 2 will be the largest, I don't know, but First Presbyterian and Holy Family Cathedral in Tulsa will be pretty close to the largest.
Yeah. And would you consider the one in Cassidy the finest organ in the state because of the acoustics? Or?
Let's say it's the finest sounding. Now, when you say the finest, you're talking about like a Steinway and a honky-tonk piano.
Right.
The Steinway is the finest, but it also is the finest sound. So now that doesn't mean that St. Luke's or St. Paul's or any other organ is a finer organ, or the Cassidy is a finer organ than those, so far as quality is concerned, but it's a finer sounding organ because 100% of the acoustics. So you see how vital the acoustics are to an organ.
Right.
We never quit ballyhooing that part of it, because it's such a main factor in the sound of an organ.
Mm-hmm.
So you wouldn't say Cassidy was the best organ, you'd say it was the best sounding.
Well, the Criterion Theater. How big's that organ?
That was 13 or 14 ranks, about the size of Civic Center. It was the largest theater organ and the finest insofar as the theater and all that was concerned. Well, one day Pat McGee, who was the manager, called me and he said, we're going to do the theater over and we want the radiators out and we want the organ out and this and that. He said, come down and give me a price. So I went down, I looked at the console and I said, what in the world would I want that organ for? I didn't even go up to see him. About a month later he called me and he said, come down here, and I went down and he said, come on now, why'd you give me that organ? I said, Pat, I don't want it. The theater organ hadn't come to the front, like keeping them and restoring them at that time. I was involved with A.O. Skinner, which is a classical organ, and I said, I'll give you $100. And he said, give me a check. And then when you get my age, time goes so fast that what seemed like 5 years might have been 15.
The man's name was McGee,
Pat McGee.
and he was going to give it to you.
Yeah. I asked him for 100 back, he said, not on your life. So I moved it to 1200 block on West Main, which I had shops up over on the second floor.
Mm-hmm.
And we had big steps and the thing to slide stuff up there. So I put it up there and later added to it and made it a very low theater. We played it for about 2 or 3 years. And the banker that owned the building, I didn't know it at the time, but he came down and said, you're going to have to move. You're going to tear the building down. Well, I didn't know there was anything wrong with him. And I just took him at his word, so, you know, you don't move something out like that in a day's time. So I started advertising it in public, in periodicals pertaining to the organ business. And I sold it out piece by piece all over everywhere from Hawaii to Alaska. And I didn't have trouble getting rid of it. And then I moved over on Linwood, and one day he came by there and wanted to know why I moved. Man, I could hit him in the head with a hammer. Well, I didn't know it at the time, but there was something wrong. He ended up in an insane asylum and died. And if I'd just known that, I'd still be up there.
And you still have the console from the organ, the criteria? You still have the organ from the console?
No, I sold everything out.
Yeah.
I sold the console to a priest in Toledo, Ohio. And some of the pipes went to George Riot, the famous organist out in California.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
His studio later burned, those pipes burned with it.
How come they tore the Criterion down?
I don't know, it was a shame, it was beautiful. They wanted to update it and whatever they did, the old system was in the way. The radiators, for one thing. They put in air conditioning or some new system. And I never did know why the organ was in the way. There's two big chambers up on each side. Of course, the console, that'd have been a simple thing, you know, to move it.
Mm-hmm.
But they wanted it out anyway, and they redecorated it. It was pretty. Of course, it was beautiful as it was originally. And then, of course, it wasn't too many years after that, you know, like everything else, it was torn down. Tulsa was a very different town as to theaters than Oklahoma City. They had 4 of those beautiful downtown theaters. The Ritz, the Orpheum, the Rialto, and Majestic. And they were all beautiful theaters, architecturally and all that. And they each one had a tremendous big pipe organ in it, much larger than this Criterion organ. And they became famous from the people that played them and through broadcasts and everything. And Oklahoma City, now they had some beautiful theaters like the Midwest and another one, State, but they never had pipe organs, and they were later theaters, more modern and all that. But Tulsa really outclassed Oklahoma City by far when it came to beautiful theaters.
They still have those old theaters in Tulsa?
No, they're all gone, like everything else. All gone.
What happened to the organs out of it?
One I took out, brought to Oklahoma City in storage, and then it was shipped to, it's in a banker's son's home in Dallas. Banker's son in El Reno, or Elk City, bought it, was going to put it in a home in Los Angeles, and he was kind of funny. And it fell through, and he sold it to the boy in Dallas. The Rialto is in a Church of God Assembly Church in Tulsa. And they use it all the time for the Theater Society and their church. I don't know where the Majestic and Orpheum went to. Probably somebody's home.
Well, anything else we can talk about? Well, have you covered everything?
It depends on what you want to talk about.
Oh, your work with organs.
Oh, it's a funny business. It's kind of a rarity because there aren't very many. And a lot of people don't know what's behind the grill. They think it's a loudspeaker or something like that. And then when they do actually find out what all is behind all that stuff up there, you know, it becomes interesting to them. And I guess that's the reason we've had so many stories written about them. Because people don't quite know what's behind one of the things. There's a whole lot more than people think.
How much air pressure does it take to run one of your organs?
Anywhere from 2, now this is static pressure. This isn't high pressure or compressed air. It's just loose static pressure. Anywhere from 2, now the theaters go on up 10, 15, and have gone up to 25. But the ordinary classic organ is on anywhere from 2 to 5 inches.
What do you mean by 2 to 5 inches?
That's wind gauge pressure, the difference between 2 columns of water.
Okay, right.
It's not compressed air, and it isn't under pressure. It's just static.
Well, I think we have a good interview.
Tom can fill you in on the real technical answers.
Because really, I don't know what question to ask about it. My ignorance is showing now. Well, I'll have to get with Tom then.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get with Tom then and get some more details on it.
Yeah, he gives details on the technical side of it and what the electronics, how the electronics have come into the organ building. What used to be you pushed a key and it pulled a lever and opened a valve is all done electronically today, and he knows that.
Yeah.
Well,
How far back does a pipe organ go?
oh gosh, beyond I guess the 14th century. I looked that up the other day. I think even beyond the 14th century. We have a book. It was written by a friend of ours. We both know him. He just died last year. Well, I guess my copy is at home.
Because I'm familiar with, Buxtehude. And he dates from what period?
Who?
Buxtehude. He's Bach's teacher.
Yeah. Gosh, I don't know. Tom can tell you all those things. I looked up the 14th century. I think it goes way beyond that. It was first, well, the natives actually, and the reeds that broke off, one of them discovered you could blow it. And then a little smarter one would start refining those. And then another one put two of them together, and so on. And then another made a goat skin to blow those 12. And it just kept on going and going. And but the art of organ building, the way your pipes are built today, is primarily the same as it was back in those days. The way of playing is different.
Well, I think that's good enough. Thank you.
Okay.